Good evening to all of you. I'm really thankful to Chandan Ghosh, chairman of this mammoth initiative, Dr. Sivalsa and his entire team for this kind invitation. Distinguished delegates, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, this occasion is a very special occasion, not only because so many of us have assembled at one place for a discussion and discourse. It's important because the subject that has been chosen for this, civil engineering for disaster resilient society, is a subject of utmost importance for every country and more so for the developing countries. Go to any developing country and you'll find the call for more roads, railways, ports, power stations, aviation sector, and hospitals, schools, water supply, telecommunication, what you have. And in each one of these, civil engineers have a major role to play. I especially will try to say 3 reasons why I think an event like this is of utmost importance. The first is that a role that civil engineers can play in disaster risk reduction is extremely critical, is more critical than you and I as civil engineers realize. Civil engineers have created marvels in engineering, and many of these are standing for centuries, defying disasters of all kinds. Civil engineers have also created, unfortunately, structures which have collapsed even before the bills of the contractor were paid. It's a very staggering contrast in our performance from place to place, country to country, region to region, situation to situation. And therefore, one of the very strong reasons we should stay with this topic is because we should recognize as our role as pivotal in disaster risk reduction initiative. The second is that civil engineering that you and I were taught in classroom is no longer the same as the civil engineering we require today. There's a hiatus between our scientific and operating tempers, and there's a huge amount of disappointment when we look at the real life problems and the kind of education we go through. Today, when we talk of disaster risk reduction, the situation is of multi-hazard. Most of us have specialized in disaster risk reduction with respect to earthquakes, floods, cyclones, landslides, avalanches, and so on. Those days are gone. Now the civil engineers will have to address the issue of total safety. Many times I have myself been for the last 40, 50 years part of the teams. They are dominated by structural engineers, and where geotechnical engineers have been taking a back seat. Now this is no longer a game of structural engineering or geotechnical engineering. It's a multidisciplinary situation. And therefore we'll have to have multidisciplinary teams. Again, the science and technology is at its peak, and it's a seamless science. So civil engineering will have to be seen in that context of seamless growth of science. Technology is all pervasive. And as engineers, we are not supposed to be driven by technology. Market-driven technologies decide the fate of structures today. We have to put our hand on the heart and see whether that's the right thing that is happening. And then civil engineers must realize that they may not be climate change experts, they may not be in the field of urbanization and so on, but all these headwinds of challenges will have to be faced by civil engineers. My main interest in this field has been, and focus has been, that real life problems, they have no contract with the standard operating procedures, the codes of practices, and so on. I have seen very often the people get carried away, and most of the civil engineers, a large number of them, serving various organizations. They just go by what is specified in the codes of practice, knowing very well that many of these standing operating procedures, the codes of practice have not been revised for decades, but they are legally protected, and there's no voice against this. Whereas the real problem is that the problems that we face today, they have no contract with these codes and practices and so on. They are merely guides. So then there comes the question of uncertainties, dealing with uncertainties, dealing with problems where we are short on facts, then we make assumptions and so on. So the old culture of engineering judgment will have to come in now. We cannot be slaves of the written information or what has been passed on to us from our teachers in solving a real problem. I think we'll have to exercise our own engineering judgment based on multidisciplinary knowledge. We have been talking about cost effectiveness, about speed effectiveness. Seldom did we give any attention to environment-friendly, nature-friendly solutions. Now those days are gone when you will claim a cheaper or a better or a speedier solution without concern for environment. And therefore, this is a new dimension that has been added to our way we design structures. Knowledge is power, no doubt about it. And our engineering colleges, universities, they're busy in generating new knowledge, thanks to artificial intelligence, thanks to the power of technology, that we are able to do many things which were in the realm of magic years back. But remember that knowledge is power, but without action, it is useless. Knowledge not put to use is a costly waste. And I'm having no hesitation to say that 80 or 90% of knowledge that we generate is yet to be put to use. I mean, somebody will have to look into that aspect. Knowledge is like bullets, and the action is like a gun. Now, if you really don't have the gun, how do you make use of your knowledge, bullets? There are many takeaways. In fact, I thought that I'll utilize my time in giving you what I have been feeling about my own experiences for the last few decades. We have lost the faculty or interest or enthusiasm of asking inconvenient questions. I think one of the greatest problems today's engineers face is they are not asking any inconvenient questions on the past failures, on things that have happened earlier, the projects which were carried out. And more so, because it's a disaster risk reduction and civil engineering is only a part of it, let me be a little general to say that many things we have done and said long years back, we still are repeating them in a different English. Maybe we are massaging the text and so on. In 1990 to 2000, we had International Decade of Disaster Reduction. We gave 12-point agenda. We gave a very clear indication that give up the band-aid approach in dealing with problems. Now, all civil engineering infrastructure that you see, which needs rejuvenation, reconstruction, or review, they are only adopting band-aid operations approach in treatment. So you have to ask the inconvenient question, why is it so? When we realized it way back in 1990 that we'll not resolve to this, why are we still continuing with that? In 1992 Earth Summit, we said that we'll have a culture of safety in engineering and civil engineering projects also included. Now, where is the focus on culture of safety? When the workmen get killed at the site, when the projects, the construction fail even before it's commissioned. So there is something that we'll have to really go seriously with it. If we knew about it and we talked about it in 1992, why are we silent about it today? Or repeat the same thing today? In 2002, we had World Summit Johannesburg Agreement, and we talked about sustainable development. Now, all civil engineers have been told as a government policy that we have to have a sustainable development. But is that development only in definition? Have we really achieved it? And we have been talking about in 2002, again 2005 to 2015, we had United Nations Decade for Education for Sustainable Development. The whole decade was there, and this over, 2015. Have we had an international event like this where we'll discuss that if we had the aim at this decade for sustainable education for sustainable development, and 2015 was the end of the year, what did we gain? And is it not as relevant a point today as it was in 2005 when the decade was launched? So when are we going to discuss these questions? Hugo framework has come now. 2005 to 2015, that's also over. We committed ourselves to integrated multi-hazard, all-inclusive approach, risk reduction to risk resilience and all that. So these concepts are not new, and we still will continue in the Sendai framework for this. So my message on this occasion is that enough has been discussed by brightest of the brains over a period of decades. Let us resolve to have an event where we try to critically look at that, ask unpleasant questions, and then the learning that is going to emerge out of this will be really a true learning. Brasilia Declaration in 2003, India was a signatory to that, and we committed that we'll reduce the road fatalities by half by 2020. Now that's over. And I'm sure that if that declaration would not have been there, we'll have a similar declaration now to have promised the same thing. So promising is one thing, delivering is quite another. I hope that this event, which you are organizing, is going to really deliver on the promises that you make, and at least leave a message that, yes, we are in for asking hard questions, and that is the way that we will achieve what we hope to achieve. Now, I will, time is always difficulty in this. Let me see how much time I have. So I will only touch upon a couple of more points, which I would not like to miss, because I feel that this is a forum I should do that. We should get inspired by good examples and learn from our failures. I mean, this is very important. You would not learn anything from classroom, but you will learn this. I give an example, civil engineering marvels, where we push the boundaries of the possible. Tower Latino Americana and Palace of Arts, you know, the famous examples, both from Mexico City. And Zewert did the miracle in taking challenge and designing something which will stand earthquake, resist earthquakes. On 28 July 1957, an earthquake of 7.7 magnitude struck. Nothing happened to Tower Latino American. It survived. Again, on 19th of September 85, magnitude 8.1 earthquake struck. 10,000 people were killed. 412 buildings were razed to ground. 3,124 buildings were damaged. But still, Tower Latino Americana survived. Now, why so? Are we not having such more examples, which occasions like this, we can produce case histories and inspire people? And then the inspiration comes because just opposite to that tower, there's a Palace of Arts, where those who designed, they were not so conscientious of this. 1904, the construction began. They had targeted that this will complete in 4 years, but it took as many as 30 years. It was completed in 34, and many times it failed. Every time an earthquake came, that building failed. So you have an example at the same place, contrasting example. I would say that there are a number of such examples, and I would recommend to the conference organizers that in the recommendation, they should powerfully say that unless we learn from this,
Dr. Bhandari, I think your mic got muted. Please unmute. Yeah, perfect, perfect, please.
Okay. So do I have 5 minutes more?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay. So now, one of the things which I always believe is that many of us have done many things well. We know how to do the things, and whenever opportunity comes, we do that. But how do we convert know-how into show-how? And how do we demonstrate this thing? So I'm happy that in this very session, you'll have Sustainable Urban Drainage System, SUDS. There's a paper on this. You will see when you scan through the literature, low impact development, green infrastructure, water sensitive urban designs. Then China is Spawn City initiative, where 80% of urban areas will absorb and reuse 70% of rainwater. So these are all wonderful concepts. But remember that we have to integrate disaster mitigation with development planning. We have to use holistic approach, total safety. Now, these are all the elements will have to be insightfully connected by a multidisciplinary team to deliver ultimate answers. So job is much bigger than this. These are the elements which should be nursed. And why I say this is that right in India, where the large number of delegates are there, and I'm sure that they are participating in various national programs, we have a flagship program of smart cities. Now, how can a smart cities be smart only by artificial intelligence, only by automation and all that? If there are floods, if there are structures which are creating problems and so on, they cannot be smart. So how can we bring these new ideas to bear upon the development of the smart cities? Similarly, for housing for all, we have target 2022, 1 year away. Now, we can't throw all the blame on COVID and explain the delays. I mean, so therefore, I think wherever we have this, also there is recently a paper I saw, 4 decades of bridges in India, 1977 to 2017. And I am told that 83% of the bridges, they have failed because of disasters of one kind or the other. At the same location, same disaster, keep destroying the bridges, and we go on rebuilding. So finally, to conclude, I would say that if the engineers who would not listen to the lessons taught by disasters, invariably they will become instrumental in destroying the structures they build. Business as usual is no longer the option. We are on the crossroads. Multi-hazard risk resilience, multidisciplinary teams are important. And even more important is the multidisciplinary insight. As I've said, I have underscored that. Benjamin Franklin said that if we fail to prepare, we are preparing to fail. Never take public resistance and reluctance lightly. I think the papers presented in this session also, this point is being made, and I 100% agree with this, that we have to be sensitive to the reluctance and try to overcome the reluctance of people. We have to listen to the cry of environment and launch rejuvenation programs. We have development programs and all that. Why not? There are exclusive programs for regeneration of an environment which we have destroyed. And we should, in the process, use big data. So last message I have for civil engineers is that the kind of DPRs we produce, the environmental impact assessment we go by, the management report we produce, and the meager data that creates uncertainties, why not we take recourse to big data for risk reduction, strategize priorities within priorities, and then we see that the future, which we see a lot of hope in all these technologies, really become a day of happiness. Srivalsa had written a letter to me saying that the declaration of this was made on the day of International Day of Disaster Reduction, and it will conclude on the day of happiness. I really hope and pray that his dreams come true. I myself gave a dream of disaster-free India, and I believe that yes, if all of us work together, I have no doubt in my mind that we are going to deliver on that. So with that note, I thank you once again for your invitation. for this. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Bhandari, for the kind address, and your address has set the direction and vision for this conference, and from the beginning itself. So we started with you and Professor Sitaram as the chief advisors for this conference, and we started with your blessings, and you have been along with us all together. So we will consider your message, and with your guidance, we will make the recommendations at the end of the conference, compiling all the essence of the talks that will be delivered by the experts. So thank you once again. So sorry for the disturbance that happened. So we started with a small disaster, we can say. Actually, what happened was that when I was live streaming, it automatically started in the YouTube, which I also was not knowing. It automatically started on a background. So yeah, it was a disaster, but he didn't miss anything important, because it was just I was only talking about the conference, so we didn't miss anything important technical. So by the time Dr. Bhandari was speaking, everything was right, and it was also, I consider, as an example of disaster resilience, because when something happens, something negative or anything, such mistakes happen. So I have seen the chat box later. So all of you were trying to, so whenever there is because we see something positive every time, whenever there is a disaster, we see only negative. Disaster brings all negatives, but we see that one thing positive that brings is that it makes us humble, and it brings people together. So similarly, I was just reading the chat messages and YouTube messages, comments. So everybody wanted to set the things right. So thank you, everyone. So I hope now everything is clear. So now let me briefly propose vote of thanks. So first of all, I sincerely thank Dr. R.K. Bhandari for kindly being with us here and delivering the inaugural address. And thanks to all the keynote speakers and session chairs who have voluntarily agreed to be part of this conference, spending their time and efforts without any remuneration. So a big salute and thanks to all the speakers and session chairs. And thanks to my colleagues, Professor Chandan Ghosh, Dr. Indrajit Pal, Dr. Chian Darren, Dr. Basanta Adhikari, Dr. Arpita, and Dr. Mr. Suraj Gautam, and all others who are here with us as the program committee chairs, and all the technical committee members, and all the papers. So we have around more than 800 authors. So to all the authors, to all the reviewers, 200 plus reviewers, and very importantly to all the participants. So I sincerely thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. And thanks to all the sponsors, NITK, NIDM, IWMI, ADRRN, IHRR, Springer, ISSMGE, IAHR, Engineering Council of India, IACRR, ASCE, AIWC, ISET, Indian Geotechnical Society, and IGS Suratkal chapter, and to the Department of Civil Engineering, NITK Suratkal. And thanks to one and all again. So now, without further delay, I will request Dr. Bhandari to kindly chair the keynote session. And with his permission, shall I introduce the speakers, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So we have three speakers today. Professor Dilanti Amaratunga, Dr. Manisha Sudhir, and Dr. Vladimir Christo. Dr. Dilanti Amaratunga is a professor of disaster risk reduction and management at Global Disaster Resilience Center at University of Huddersfield, United Kingdom. And she is a well-known expert in disaster resilience with a global reputation. And she received several awards to her credit. And she leads the university's Global Disaster Resilience Center and has 300 plus publications and traveled around the globe delivering several keynote lectures. And she is also a member of the steering committee of the UNISDR Making Cities Resilient campaign. And our next speaker is Dr. Manisha Sudhir. She is the Dean of International Programs at Amrita School of Sustainable Development. And she is the UNESCO Chair in experiential learning for sustainable innovation and development. She has a PhD in computer science engineering and MBA in systems management. And her work in landslide disaster prevention and landslide monitoring based on wireless sensor network system is very popular. And she has several publications and several awards to her credit. And our third speaker, Dr. Vladimir Christo. He is a research associate at the Royal Botanic Garden at Edinburgh, UK. And he is a hands-on researcher with a diverse background in natural sciences. And he has several publications to his credit. And he is working on the ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. And he serves on a number of editorial boards. And he is passionate about biodiversity and ecosystem prevention. So with this brief introduction of speakers, with the permission from the chair, Dr. R.K. Bhandari, I will invite Professor Dilanti Amaratunga to kindly deliver her address. Professor Dilanti, please. You may please share your screen.
Thank you very much. Can all of you hear me and can all of you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, madam. Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
excellent, excellent. You know, I thought, don't know whether that's going to be another disaster, you know, at the beginning of my speech. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for the organizers for the invite to speak at this very, very important event. So today I'm going to talk about disaster resilience properties and in particular the built environment discourse. So from the okay, so I suppose, you know, I'm not going to go through all the details. Of course, you know, I consider myself as a scientist in disaster risk reduction and management with over 25 years of experience, and then, you know, publications and so on and so forth. Of course, you know, I'm not going to cover because there was an introduction before. And I want to acknowledge the support of one of our research assistants in this work, Shavindri Nisanka. She's a research assistant at our research center who has actually done a lot of work in this particular area that I'm going to cover today. So I suppose, you know, again, you know, we know the status of disasters these days, and I do not think that we need need further emphasis than what we already know. For example, I suppose, you know, the World Risk Index in 2020 indicates the disaster risk for 181 countries in the world. So which is actually quite remarkable in my view. And also sort of this very up-to-date European Commission report highlights between 1980 and 2017, disasters caused by natural hazards actually cost the European Union more than 90,000 lives and over 500 billion euros of economic losses. So that itself actually highlights the need of the hour to address this very important issue. So just to sort of remind ourselves about very recent disasters, for example, Typhoon Vamco in Philippines. Of course, it took place November last year, and I'm sure you all can actually remember the devastation it created. And also, so another example that I want to highlight here is actually the sea earthquake that actually took place near the Greek island of Samos, again in October last year. So again, you know, some of the pictures just to illustrate the devastation created by that earthquake. And of course, like, you know, we can't forget about the Hurricane Laura in Dominican Republic and Haiti, and it was in August 2020. These are just snapshots of very recent disasters that the world community had to face during the last several months. So as a summary, I suppose if you take then what we can see from these is that the number of disasters are on the increase. So this particular slide actually summarizes that in quite a bit of detail. If we take 1980 to 1999 versus 2000 to 2019, the two decades each, you can see the differences. So reported disasters have increased, almost is very close to double. And also the total deaths is a little bit more. And also I think the total population that was affected is more. And I think what is remarkable is the economic losses. You can see it has actually once again very close to the double. So it can, I think what I want to emphasize here is the impact of natural hazards. So getting back to the economic damage, which is once again really an important issue in the modern world, particularly with the urbanization and so on and so forth, the economic assets, the value of economic assets is increasing. So again, some really important statistics and for us to remember. For example, it says that the total global economic losses from natural hazards and man-made catastrophic were $337 billion in 2017. And also it says at $144 billion, global insured losses from disasters events in 2017 were the highest ever. Again, these are really good statistics for us to understand the extent of the problem that we all face today. And getting back to the breakdown of economic losses across the types of disasters from 1998 to 2017, you can actually see the storms were by far the costliest type of disaster, with reported storm losses amounting to $1,300 billion over the past 20 years. That is actually twice the reported losses for either flooding or earthquakes. So that is actually quite again a remarkable statistics, not in a good way, but in a bad way. So with that in mind, what I want to actually cover within the next 20 minutes is to briefly take you through disaster risk and the built environment within the context of the topic of this conference, the civil engineering for disaster risk reduction, and also to get a bit more understanding on societal role of the built environment, and also the properties of disaster resilience and associated terminologies, and to sort of produce you with a framework, and then to sort of discuss about the way forward. So I suppose the disaster risk and the built environment, again, a key topic of this conference, and the role of the civil engineering in that. I suppose I think it is fair to say that the built environment is made up of man-made structures, which often constitute the weakest links and will turn out to be the most dangerous places during disasters. I hope you agree with me for saying that. And the impact of disasters are largely felt by inhabitants, communities, and countries, mainly because the infrastructure still remains complicated, interdependent, and connected. So you can actually sort of see this is actually very much an interconnected systems. So there are neighborhood designs, housing, food systems, natural environments, and also transportation networks. So this is actually how I see as the built environment discourse. Getting back to sort of some of the examples. So during the Taiwan earthquake, so people trapped as buildings cave in after leaving buildings tilting at 45-degree angles. So you can actually sort of see the devastation and the importance of structural stability in this instance. And also sort of Right, okay. So if you sort of take the Chile earthquake, getting back to 2010, that was, 13 stories were plummeted as this was actually one of the brand new apartments buildings, toppled like a felled tree, hugging each other all the way down. So you can actually sort of see the devastation it generated. So in that sense, within the context of this conference, I see the resilient built environment as a kind of a system of complex subsystems coming together. In my view, this is how I would like to interpret that from the point of view of design, develop, and manage context-sensitive buildings, spaces and places. I think that is very important, and I will get to that point in a bit of detail later, which have the capacity to resist or change in order to reduce hazard vulnerability and enable society to continue functioning economically and socially when subjected to a hazard event. So that is very, very important. These two key terms, economically and socially. So it is not only structural stability, we need to look into how economically and socially stable these structures are. So in that sense, the resilient built environment can have so many characteristics. Again, I have actually listed them here again, but it is not my intention to go through them in detail because it's outside the topic. But having said that, these are some of the characteristics that we need to be mindful of, and they all are relevant to what Dr. Bhandari spoke as a chairperson of this session, identifying the modern day civil engineering and its discourse. Okay, so how I see the built environment or our outer envelope is actually a kind of a combination of products and processes. So this is actually my interpretation of how I see the built environment that we all are living in. It is not only the products but the process as well. So you can actually see this in that sense. I identify that under 6 areas. For example, the first one is constructing. We all know that, and that is one of the key components of civil engineering profession. And also not only that, I think I want to emphasize the importance of give me a second. I think I really do not know what is going on. Give me a second. Sorry, yeah. So, okay, so what I see this as a kind of a collection of complex systems. So as I sort of said, the construction is actually very much a kind of a civil engineering related aspect. But I see the entire built environment consists of different aspects. For example, developing people and also stimulating the economy, and also facilitating the governance, and also protecting the environment, and also nurturing the relationships among people. So this is how I see this very complex equation, kind of a collection of systems and structures. So if you sort of move to the what is actually disaster resilient properties, is actually sort of it can be actually sort of there are so many underlying characteristics that we can look into. So if you sort of go back to the key properties of disaster resilience within the context of built environment, what we have done is our team, we have actually done a really detailed analysis, and we have actually arrived at this framework. And as you can see, it has 6 different high-level components in it. For example, adaptive capacity, coping capacity, robustness, redundancy, rapidity, and participative capacity. Those are actually the high-level 6 properties that we want to put forward as the initial key characteristics of the built environment. So if we actually sort of take one at a time very briefly, adaptive capacity is very much the property of a system in which structures are modified to prevent future disasters. So you can actually sort of see a picture of, this picture actually indicates a kind of a different thinking in structural designs. So that actually indicates the adaptive capacity of a system. So if you sort of go by the coping capacity, what do you mean by coping capacity? The coping capacity is actually the capacity to identify problems, establish priorities, and mobilize resources when conditions exist that threaten to disrupt some element, system, or other unit of analysis. So the coping capacity of people, systems, and the organizations is really important. And of course, sort of a few more examples. I suppose, again, I think it is really important to recognize that the coping capacity can be attributed to three transformative points. So the first one can be mindfulness and reconnection to natural assets, and also to human-made elements. Again, collection of very complex systems here: water, food, energy, air, and also governance, infrastructure, and economy. And also there need to be a sense of agency in both individuals and groups, and also very strong social community cohesion. So you can see that there are various aspects of coping capacity that we can look into from the point of view of built environment. So the next one is actually participative capacity, meaning of that is it is a system's ability to change its own structures to interventions by other systems. So you can actually sort of see this very simple diagram. Again, I think I'm talking to the wrong audience here. Most of you are civil engineers. I'm sure you get the point here. So you can see the variations between the resting position and also during a flood event, what happens to the structure. And also the next one is actually the participative capacity. The meaning of that is actually when a building is constructed on top of flexible pads that isolated the foundation from ground, and during an earthquake, for example, it hits only the base, moves while the structure remains steadily. So I suppose, something like this, again, these are actually some of the new thinking in structural design, which fits in very well with the participative capacity of structures that we are dealing with. So the next one is actually, again, adaptive capacity. The meaning is, for example, concrete and plastic rings can be placed underneath the channel shock waves around the building. So I think, you can sort of see the point that I'm trying to emphasize here. So that characteristics of that sort can be called as an adaptive capacity. So if you move to the next characteristic, that is actually the robustness. The meaning is that it is actually the ability of a system to maintain desired characteristics of a system despite changes to the entire system. So you can actually sort of see, there can be impact on various systems, but the other subsystems actually has the capacity to implement without having any impact on the overall system's failures. So this is actually called robustness. So again, another example here, for example, there has been significant investigation aimed at expanding knowledge that will enable the construction of a generation of buildings that are more robust and safer. So you can see this diagram, building disaster resilient shell houses using insulated concrete forms. Again, there have been a lot of new thinking coming through in emphasizing the robustness characteristic. And if we sort of take the next one is actually the redundancy. So we have seen this in a lot of instances. For example, the meaning of redundancy is the extent to which elements, systems, or other units of analysis exist that are substitutable and capable of satisfying functional requirements in the event of disruption, degradation, or loss of functionality. So you can actually sort of see there can be in simple terms, having multiple sources and ways of doing the same thing as a kind of a backup. So that is in layperson's terms, what do you mean by redundancy is. So here you can actually sort of see a real life situation where there's a production server and also there's a backup server, and also as another system backup, there's an offsite backup server also. A situation like that can be discussed as being very redundant focus. So the next characteristic is actually the rapidity. So this is actually the last key characteristic that I want to put forward. So the meaning is the capacity to meet priorities and achieve goals in a timely manner, and in order to minimize losses and avoid future disruption. So the timing is really, really important. And I want to emphasize the integrated early warning systems as an example here, where flood alerts, flood warning, and severe flood warning are communicated to communities at a rapid manner, so that the people are aware and they can evacuate and be out of danger. So in that sense, I suppose, just to summarize, what I want to emphasize is, again, the built environment discourse. I suppose, within the role of the built environment, again, it is actually not only structures, which is very important. I see this as a kind of a combination of multidimensional issues, combining construction, development, stimulation, facilitation, protection, and nurturing. So this is actually the multidimensional view of built environment, and that actually leads to six different key characteristics. And I covered them in briefly: coping capacity, adaptive capacity, and so on and so forth. So just to summarize, I'm spot on time. So thank you very much for that. I suppose the key takeaway points that I want to emphasize here is that the resilience is not only products. We need to consider both products and processes. And also, it is easier to focus on short-term solutions, but developing disaster resilience is very complex and is multidimensional. So in that sense, we need to look into the problem through the product and the processes, not only product, but both products and processes. In that sense, we really need to work on interdisciplinary solutions, again, as highlighted by the chair, Dr. Bandari. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ambartunga. I think I must compliment you for, first of all, the focus on the built environment, something very, very special for all of us. And then you spoke about the disaster resilient properties, synthesis of the concepts and terminologies. I think the 6 disaster resilient properties that you mentioned: robustness, redundancy, rapidity, participative capacity, adaptive capacity, and coping capacity. Most of us really are practicing this not in a coherent manner. I think to bring them all together sends a message. Now, time is always constant, but I would like to ask you 2 or 3 quick questions, which we may correspond if there is not much of time to answer them. One is that I have always this concern, I have been part of these committees right from 1980s on definitions, terminologies, and all that. And all the papers that you see, they throw more definitions and all that. In your paper also, you talk about definition of a disaster and societal function, disruption to societal functions and all that others. Many of the developing countries have come out with their disaster management acts, and these definitions have a legal meaning also. So is it not the duty of our professionals not to throw too many definitions, but to take those and try to improve upon it, so that when the acts and other things get improved, because many of the world conferences and all that and literature that you see, they already have the definitions. So there should be something of a reflection on those to reword them so that we carry forward the message rather than create more possibilities and all that and keep the pot boiling. So this is one thing. Second, that I am always concerned about the literature at the highest level using natural disasters. In fact, and I still see the statistics coming out, weather-related earthquake, landslides, and all that. And as a professional, I know that many times it is impossible to decide whether it's weather-related or this. It may be a last straw that breaks the camel's back. So when are we going to switch on to the multi-hazard concept, where we do not throw these statistics? I mean, they may be necessary for some purpose, but I really always take this with a grain of salt, that how these statistics come and how are we going to check their credibility. So these two things that I wanted to know, whether we should continue using this and encouraging this natural hazard disasters and statistics on that, because I don't know how these are generated, and I have yet to find a disaster in a built environment and situations where fragile ecology, that they are natural anymore. So thank you. Over to you. If there are quick comments, otherwise we'll.
All right. Okay. So I think I'll try my best to be quick, because again, we can actually have a long discussion on that, Dr. Bhandari. But I'm sure there will be chances in the future. So I suppose again, relating to definitions and so on and so forth, how I see that is actually kind of a part of a positive thinking, because I think it indicates that people continuously work on these, and in that sense, that is how the definitions are coming through. But having said that, what is important is, I think, generation of new knowledge, new terminology is actually a good thing. But what is important is transferring this knowledge towards practice and policy. I think that is very, very important, rather than purely relying on definitions, but to sort of translate those definitions and the thinking behind that to practical policy and guidelines. I think that is really, really important. That is actually very one line response to your first part. And the second part is how credible the data is. Again, I get your point. It is very difficult to understand how these data have been arrived at. But again, we need to trust the systems, and we need to actually reflect the publications or the publishers of this data to take it as it is, and that they are actually taking all the efforts possible to make sure that they are close to as accurate as possible. So in my view, this data is really important for us to understand the current status, so that and also to do any predictions for the future. So in that sense, I think always making reference to data is important, and it is needed in my view, because otherwise we will be actually just working only on hypothetical assumptions. So in that sense, I think making reference to quantitative data always actually helps us to understand the real situation. But I agree with you. Still, there can be questions about how accurate and how robust these data sets are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Nobody will disagree with the need for data and more of data. We are talking about big data analysis and so on.
Yeah.
My only worry is that if we have to go really towards multi-hazard culture, I should see some breath of fresh air coming from somewhere, because still in 2021, we are going to talk about individual hazards and things like that without connecting them together. Multi-hazard ecosystem. I don't think we are doing justice, but
I think multi-hazard is the way forward. So that is why I suppose within the built environment context, that is why I did not relate that to any individual hazards. That is actually from the concept of multi-hazards, because none of the countries are capable of having different systems or different hazards. So that is where it is. So multi-hazard is the way forward. Right. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, madam. Thank you very much. And now shall we move on to the next speaker, Dr. Meenakshi V. Ramesh. Could you please take over? Meenakshi, are you there?
Mayusha madam, you are the co-host now. You may please unmute and share your screen. Yeah.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Very happy to see everybody here. Namaskaram, Bhandari sir. Namaskaram, Chandan sir, everybody. Srival sir. Thank you, everybody, for giving me an opportunity to present the work in the disaster management area. Let me just try to share my PPT quickly. Good evening, everybody. So the topic of today's my talk is on IoT technologies for early warning and management of disasters. Myself from Manisha Vinodini Ramesh from Amrita Vishwavidyapeetham. So what I am looking forward is to talk about IoT technologies and the need of multi-hazard management is what I am trying to bring in today's meeting. As you all know, even the previous speaker has mentioned how the disasters have been increased over the years from 1980 to 2019. And if you see that, especially, you can see that there is a large increase in the flood scenario, 1,389 to 3,254. And at the same time, each and every earthquake or drought or landslide, any of those scenarios we take, everything is increasing. And the total number of disasters reported over the years also has increased in each of the areas. And if you see that the economic loss is highest for storm and the flood, and also number of people died is more for whereas earthquake. And with respect to the reporting, large number of floods is what is the highest one, we will see that. So with all these different types of disasters increasing over the years, in the disaster management cycle, we will have to get ready with the preparedness to take the plans and procedures designed and so that the minimal physical and property damage will come in. Whenever a disaster occurs, after that, the required response or actions need to be taken, and how the recovery need to be done, and what can be the planning of mitigation, where there can be sustained actions that decrease the risk of a hazard. So if I take the case study of Kerala floods as a Kerala floods, what I had seen is it was also showing a characteristics of multi-hazard event. So if you see in 2018, in the southwest monsoon, the extreme rainfall, there was a 42% departure from the normal, and the flood was 14% of total land of area was covered with flood, and more than 200 plus landslides, and 36 dams have at a time opened, and even change in river course has been seen. All the districts of Kerala entered into red alert, and a death toll of more than 450 and a displacement of 1 lakh. 10 lakh plus people can be seen here. And it was such a large impact, spatially and temporally, it was very hard for the administration to handle because it was unexpected and unprecedented for the state of Kerala. The rainfall was there for continuous rainfall in the month of August 2018, and it contributed to landslides, floods, collapse of infrastructure, houses, and ruination of agricultural lands, etc. And it predominantly affected in the different districts of Kerala like Kannur, Kozhikode, Malappuram, Wayanad, Thrissur, Ernakulam, Idukki, Alappuzha, Pathanamthitta. What we have seen that there was a spatio-temporal correlation of events of rainfall, flood, landslides, and also with respect to dam opening, which is leading to multi-hazard scenario, where we have seen scenarios which was showcasing combined effect of hazard, which is the union or merging of different hazards in the same location, consequent hazards like occurring as a direct result of an event or a situation, subsequent as an occurring after one is over, may or may not be related, and simultaneous occurring at the same time. So as a single event, if you treat, it was an extreme rainfall which triggered everything with a major single event, and you can see that in the table it shows that how in each period the departure was increasing from the previous years. And this has led to consequent multi-hazard event. If you see the figure, the figure 4 shows the Idukki Dam opening timeline, including daily rainfall, landslide events, and flood conditions. So heavy rains of more than 2,515 mm for 80 number of days triggered the consequent flood event and filling up of dam. So if you see, the dam inflow was there in the green, and slowly it is increasing. You see, by 8th August, it is increasing. And that's when the first landslide is starting on the 9th August. And as it moved forward, you can see that if they started increasing the outflow. The moment the outflow also started, slowly flooding is increasing. So you can see that it is slightly flooded, and this is more of the upstream area is what you are seeing. And this has forced the dams to open their gates and release excess water, leading to an increase in area of flooding. So you can see the red lines, which is showing the outflow from the dam, which has predominantly increased from the day of 9th August, and it has gone high up to 18th August, and then it has tapered down. So this resulted in the forest collapse, demolition of bridges, roads, houses, ruination of agricultural land, and loss of lives. So several social consequences also has brought in, because it has damaged the medical facilities, it has damaged the roads, everything. So this has, because of the triggering of landslides also, it blocked the rivers, resulting flood in other regions. And especially if you see Wayanad, there was rise in water level, there was river bank erosion, weakened weather geology, etc. So you could see consequent multi-hazard events based on this is happening in these places because of this rainfall which is coming in, which was leading to larger effects. And it has actually in the high range areas in the districts of Idukki, Wayanad, Malappuram, Kannur experienced combined effect of landslide and flood, which worsened the whole thing. And from there, it moved into the style of consequent multi-hazard even more or less in the downstream area. So IWMI dams detail is what is shown in this one, where as the timeline, if you see, compared to the figure 4, which if you see that you can see flood was only on, you are seeing slight floods. But whereas almost in the same days in the downstream, you can see how it is flooded and how that is creating a larger impact. So the continuous rainfall for the last week of July to the first week of August led to accumulation of water in dams. And in the same day, rainfall has triggered consequent landslide. And this heavy increase in rainfall led all dams reaching their maximum threshold, leading to flood. So the upstream, the flooding was less, whereas the downstream, it has catched up very heavily, where normally in the downstream area, none of them was even imagining that there is going to be a flood at all. So these things has contributed to subsequent multi-hazards, which may or may not have a direct impact, because all this has also triggered because of the previous anthropogenic activities, such as removal of toes or toes of the hill, or sand mining, or quarrying of mountains, or urbanization of catchment area, must have aggravated these scenarios also, leading to simultaneous multi-hazard. So when you see here in the figure 5, at the same time, you can see there is landslide, there is flood, there is dam opening, there is extreme rainfall. So the disaster event has, over the time period, it has moved from single event to multiple event. So it has from 9th August on 2018, it became simultaneous multi-hazard impact has been seen. Why this has also aggravated was because of the dam network. Kerala, across Kerala, there are 58 dams, and the figure 6 shows the different dams and how they are interconnected from the dam 1 to 2, 3. From the upstream to downstream, you are seeing the different dams which are going. In the map of Kerala, you can see the different dams, how it is located. So the spatially distributed dams in the Periyar River Basin are interconnected in such a way that the flow of excess water from one dam in the upper region feeds those located on the downstream in the river, contributing to the multi-hazard. And this is an image which shows how the flood and landslide affected in the Idukki and the Ernakulam area. So if you see the one with the pink color, that is the Ernakulam area, is where it is more flooded, whereas on the other area, which is the Idukki region, it has very less flooding because they are at the upstream. So the impact has actually, even though it initially started, like if you just take the district of Ernakulam, the impact due to flood was only covering Alva, Muvattuvuzha and North Paravur. And then as the Idukki Dam opened on 9th of August, within few hours, the flood risk increased, covering additional areas like Kaladi, Perumbavoor, Nedabasheri, Angamali, Varappuzha, which increased the coverage of risk by 24. So the Idukki Dam is networked with all these different dams, which has led to this current that Kerala floods to reach as a multi-hazard event consisting of single, combined, consequent, subsequent, and simultaneous multi-hazard. So even though it started as a single event triggered by rainfall, it transferred by itself, leading to a multi-hazard event. So this shows the chronology with respect to the dates, how it has actually moved from single to multi-hazard event, from dam opening to from the rain to dam opening to the flood, etc. So you were able to see that even though it triggered as an extreme weather, it had 3 cases which are coming in. It has landslides, it has flood and dam opening. If you think as 3 pathways, the extreme weather has caused the dam to fill up, and which has caused flood and which has led to landslide. Extreme weather can also directly cause flood, which led interrelatedly to the dam opening and landslide. Extreme weather directly did that. So all these phenomena together happen on a spatio-temporal manner during that period. So what is it demanding? It is demanding a knowledge of multi-hazards and their interrelationships. So it's in the current scenario, the number of multi-hazards are increasing, and it is demanding us to understand we cannot study it as one single events or single hazards. It's highly necessary for any area to study the multi-hazards. And this leads to the knowledge, the need of the knowledge of spatio-temporal vulnerability and its impact. So what do we need to do? We need to devise scalable, sustainable, resilient disaster management approaches, SSRDM. So my question is, will IoT technologies help to achieve this SSRDM? So if you want to achieve the SSRDM, if you look at the disaster management cycle, you need to develop the knowledge on what do you need to measure, what do you need to monitor, what are the interrelationship of factors, what thresholds you need to develop, how do you from the threshold you reach to early warning procedure, then how do you make it as a participatory approach and empower the community to understand. If you bring in all the piece of technologies and solutions to consider getting all this knowledge, then only you will be able to implement scalable, sustainable, resilient approaches. So to build an IoT system like that, you will need to measure by participatorily sensing different aspects with the help of citizens, virtual sensing by using physical sensors of one type and then getting the virtual values of another sensing parameters, plus the physical sensing, then monitoring. Some places you need continuous data collection. Some of the cases you need adaptive data collection or multi-level data aggregation. And you will also require real-time communication because disasters are, most of the time it is unpredictable. And you will need to visualize at multiple scales so that you can understand. With all these things, the major portion is knowledge discovery. So you need to build social models, statistical models, hydrological or geological models, signal processing, data mining, machine learning. And with all those models, you have to forecast weather forecast, hydrological models, slope stability, etc., and leading to early warning, where you will naturally require artificial intelligence, multi-phase, multi-scale, real-time communication, and services and alerts. So all these things is pointing us that we will need multi-scale needs. We have to have a multi-pronged approach. We have to have the transdisciplinary capabilities has to be built in the community. And we have to work very closely with community to empower them so that we can bring in the disaster risk reduction. And for all these things, naturally, we need to have the vulnerability mapping. We need to have meteorological, geological, hydrological analysis, real-time monitoring, multi-scale decision models and early warning, and bring in community resilience programs to take forward. So if you think of an IoT system in a multi-hazard scenario, if I take a Kerala case study, to understand extreme weather, you will need to understand parameters like rainfall, temperature, humidity. To understand flood, you will need to understand parameters like rainfall, water level, waterfall, terrain properties, etc. For the landslide, you may have to understand rainfall, moisture, pore pressure, the movement, etc. For dam opening, you need to understand water level, pressure, strain, particle settlement, etc. So if you look into it, it demands a heterogeneous monitoring of parameters with a different spatial variability, and they all come from different domains, and the temporal variability also is differing. So there are spanning of multiple locations, with the spatial variability is there, temporal variability is there, heterogeneity is there, and also technology is varying. So it is highly necessary for us to actually develop an interdisciplinary capability or transdisciplinary capability to build in IoT systems for multi-hazard scenario. So what you have to have is, by integrating these things, you need to build a low-cost system which will be capable to monitor at multiple locations. You have to have a real-time wireless connectivity. And as you know that if you want a real wireless connectivity, in the extreme weather conditions, you lose wireless connectivity. So you have to take care of the fault tolerance. And you have to, because of that, you have to bring in the heterogeneous connection. And at the same time, you cannot sit and wait for the data to come to the central location and then do all the processing. So you need to bring in edge computing where each node is capable to take local decisions. So they have to understand, analyze the data locally, come up with the local decision, and they should be even capable to give localized warning. But if you want to sustain the system, the most important thing is you need to optimize the power. How do you bring in the energy efficiency? So when you select the sensors, when you select the platforms, you need to look into these trade-offs when you are building the system. So the IoT framework will require a multi-scale monitoring layered architecture, which is capable of looking into what is happening in a soil layer or in a river point, in a single location, in a regional scale, in a site or a multi-site. How is it happening? So sensing has to be defined with multiple scales. And based on that, you have to define what you want. And then the data acquisition has to be in such a manner that you are able to collect the data and aggregate with respect to specific area-wise properties. So your data acquisition layer can be a site-specific, or it can be like a particular location for a whole site or a catchment area. But all these things now you have to communicate. Communication itself, can have wired or wireless communication. So you at different levels. So if you say, if it is just one soil layer, you are looking into it, maybe wired communication is okay. But if you are going into a regional scale, wired will not help us. We will have to go into wireless communication. And when you go much more bigger as multiple site, you have to bring in heterogeneous communication. With all these things, now all of them has to have same time, all of them has to be capable to have the location part, and it has to be able to have the dynamic scheduling so that it understands the context, reduce the consumption of energy by switching on of sensors, and then do the thing. And then with understand in the information layer, collect the spatio-temporal variations, and based on that come into the decision where they will look into it, adaptive learning and threshold development, which will move on to the service layer, which will give you the alerts required and the risk warning which is required. So it's a bigger process which involves dealing with heterogeneity, dealing with interoperability, and dealing with scalability. So you need integration of all these things so that you can have the right level of knowledge absorption, knowledge discovery, and information dissemination so that we can build a resilient community. So these all will require IoT should have edge-based edge nodes. It should need fog nodes to cater to the regional requirements. It will need cloud to actually to do the complex analysis and also to cover the large spatial things. So you will need different types of these things to cater to this multi-hazard scenario. This one talks about the landslide network, which we have put in Munnar, where we have sensors deployed beneath the earth with multiple sensors, which collects the data and communicates the data through the real-time wireless sensor networks, have the decision models, and have the warning decision. We have this system currently in Munnar and also in Sikkim. And even these type of systems are not enough today to cater to the multi-hazard scenario. So you have to bring in the other sensing parameters. You have to bring into the high spatial variability. How do you handle, etc. So in all of these things, you need to bring in actually the decision models. You need to bring in the decision models where machine learning and artificial intelligence is very important, because Earth there are a lot of parameters even today we don't know. So how do we understand that inherent parameters which we don't know? Machine learning and artificial intelligence will help us to actually go deeper into the real-time data analysis, then do the adaptive learning, and then bring up the intelligent forecasting. So we will have to do spatio-temporal analysis and also develop machine learning-based models from which we should be able to derive thresholds over the years. Here, naturally, the major constraint is data. You need to have a long-term data. As you get more and more data, it becomes better and better. And those models will help you to do the nowcasting, forecasting, and early warning, whether it is 24 hours ahead or whether it is 3 hours ahead or even 1 hour ahead. And with all these things, to have this knowledge everywhere and to have the administration to act on it, you will need a visualization which is pervasive enough, where it is capable to give different parameters at different places and different for the different access groups. So this shows one of the visualization and aspect of our landslide system, which talks about whenever it crosses the particular threshold levels, it shows the variation in the risk level with respect to the colors. And in the landslide scenario where we have developed the multiple level of warning. Why do you need multiple level of warning? Because to get ready to respond in the right manner. If you want to know that there is a change or variability coming, in this case, the first level warning will go to the researchers, the second level will go to the government, then it go to the media or public. But can I just do like that? No, I will have to actually make sure that what I am giving as a warning is well vetted. So whatever field data needs to be actually analyzed with the laboratory and the simulation models, and combining them, you check that whether the warning is right. And if and only if, please release it. Otherwise, it can actually bring in the chaos. So for each of the things, this particular warning model, what you are seeing is for landslides, but like this, for the flood or whether it is for the extreme rainfall condition dam, all those models has to come together to build an adaptive multi-scale warning so that we can early warn things. So you will need monitoring through external resources, which was like you may have to do ground-based sensing, IMD forecast, camera network, maybe computer vision-based technology, social media, etc. And then model and threshold develop with respect to context-aware models, regional rainfall models, slope stability, or any of those things, which will lead to multi-scale, multi-level warning, where you will come from site-specific to near site-specific or regional things. And from there, it will go into rescue and relief optimization, which will come with emergency overlay or community models or crowd resource. So when the disaster hit Kerala first 2018, we have worked with real-time disaster management, which would help for rescue and relief with a 24-hour call center and also a Amrita Kripa mobile application. In the 24-hour call center, there are more than 500 students for more than 2 weeks sitting and doing the whole rescue and relief, working with the soldiers, working with the police authorities, working with the government officials, and identifying where each of the locations are and then helping. And at the same time, parallelly, Amrita Kripa mobile application has been developed and has been extensively used, and we are able to save more than 1 lakh people. And that has helped us to actually build a spatio-temporal application, which is able to give us how the flood is progressing and how the water level is increasing. And at the same time, it is also able to tell us what are the locations where the victims are, how we will be able to provide them. Somebody may need food, somebody may need medical care, somebody may need something else, or each of those things, maybe clothes, etc. So they were handling this multiple requests and multiple localities using this. So here it is using a crowdsourced technique where the citizen themselves is working on it. And normally we have seen in several scenarios that who is the victim, they will use it. But in Kerala scenario, we had seen that the people, there are a lot of volunteers use this, and also that helped us to actually expand heavily on it. So to build in this community resilience, we have to build an integrated approach. So you will have to have a data collection from the site-specific things, from the meteorological dynamics, landscape, from the crowdsourcing activities. Then you have to go through a even detection framework, which will look into the data tagging and classification, the analysis, maybe speech analysis, text analysis, sensor analysis, image, weather, etc., and bring up the social and community models and data-driven models. And along with that, adaptive learning, threshold development, event detection, multi-scale, which will help us to provide the alert on this alert customization app service, so that we will be able to give service to the right person at the right time, and to build an open platform for emergency communication. Over and above, before a disaster hits, And you have to engage the community and train them. That preparedness is the most important, and it has to be a continuous thing, and it has to be a phased approach, which will help us to build the resilience required in the community. This is one of the landslide which happened during that rainfall, and where we have gone and seen. This is 2019 also. So to have the community resilience is community disaster resilience is of paramount importance. Otherwise, any technology you put in, it will not function properly, because they won't believe it and they won't listen to you. So you have to have the community along with you on a participatory manner. You have to build. It has to be a multi-phase, multi-scale integrated approach has to come in, and you have to develop systems and solutions which are adaptive and integrated to bring in the community disaster resilience. So
Madam,
that
excuse me, madam.
Yes,
it's already 7:30. So can you conclude?
Yes, I'm minding. So that you will be able to achieve the requirements and move forward with all these things. And so it will require the integration of remote sensing, GIS, IoT, DRR, etc., and integrated approach of community-based disaster resilience, so that a multi-scale decision model can be brought in, and integrated community resilience can be brought in. So we had also in this work several collaborations with the different universities, and also with the BGS, King's College London, and University of Trento, and taking forward. I think that covers my presentation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Manisha ji. That was a very thought-provoking presentation on a topic which I consider extremely important from disaster risk reduction point of view. So thank you very much. I think we will have the questions in the end for all the three presentations, so that we know precisely how much time is left. I would simply say a couple of things which are very striking. You rightly pointed out many things, but I will just pick two. One is the interplay of causative factors. I have seen, whether it's a landslide, early warning, or other cases, people go by triggering factors. So what they see in the end, last week or 10 days, what had happened, and they base their entire early warning on that. So that is a very dangerous thing to do. And I think we should gradually bring the focus to interplay of factors over a geological time scale. And that is what you had really done well in highlighting this, along with the multi-hazard concept. Then another point is the threshold for early warning. This is something which is really needs a lot of intensive research and thinking, interactive dialogue, and insightful multidisciplinary domain, because many of these, if you are not taking all the causative factors into account, they are very false. And if the false early warning goes, it has a telling effect on that. So that is also, you did very nicely bring this out. And finally, I would say that artificial intelligence and IoT is going to our future. So you have more or less laid the foundation and are nurturing this. We are all with you on that. But please ensure that we are not swayed by the cases where there are repetitive slides and still we call them early warning. What early warning we want? Every monsoon they take place and all that. So there is no early warning. These are the alerts where better do something. And much of the investigation and analysis and development of research should go on first time slides or in built environment where we see the hazards and all that. Their huge contribution will come. So with that, I think if the organizers agree that we keep the questions in the end, could we go to the next speaker, Dr. Vladimir Krivstov, and he is also going to talk on the blue-green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, sustainable urban drainage system. So I invite him to make his presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Khandari. And thank you so much for Srivals and all the organizers for giving us this opportunity to present a keynote talk. Now, let me just try to share my screen. Could I check whether everybody could hear me loud and clear first.
Yeah, it's fine. By
Yes.
And could you see my presentation in the presentation mode now?
Yes. Perfect.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to be talking today about multiple benefits of blue-green infrastructure and the relevance it has to the reduction of environmental risks. First of all, I'd like to note that I will be drawing heavily on work of a number of people. And first of all, I've acknowledged here on the slide the co-authors on the paper we submitted for the conference proceedings. I will have further acknowledgements at the end, plus there are photo credits and other acknowledgements as we go through. And in particular, I'd like to very much emphasize Steve Birkinshaw, my co-author, who contributed really significantly both to this work and for preparation of these slides. So just a bit of a jargon buster to start off with. Abbreviations, very commonly said GI for green infrastructure, BGI for blue-green infrastructure, and SUDS, either with capital U or with just lowercase u for sustainable drainage system or sustainable urban drainage system. They're all pretty much sister concepts, and quite often they're actually used interchangeably. However, there are slight differences, which we are not going to really try to bog down into, but green infrastructure, according to most definition, keeps emphasis on a network of multifunctional green spaces, which can deliver quality of life and environmental benefits. That's from the Town and Country Planning Authority. Now, BGI, blue-green infrastructure, keeps emphasis actually also on a network, but with an emphasis of ecosystem services provided. That's the European Commission definition, but you will find very many very similar ones. And of course, as we come to SUDS, then the emphasis on the blue component, on the water component, becomes even more pronounced. And effectively, it is basically the idea to align the management practices with the modern drainage system, with natural processes. Now, this is taken from Wikipedia, but you will find that a lot of official organizations actually have something similar and echo that. No, the slide is not changing for whatever reason. Okay, changing now. So just a few examples of blue-green infrastructure and SUDS here. You could see filter drains, preamble block pavement, that probably would just fall under definition of SUDS as opposed to green or blue-green infrastructure, although I'm aware people might have views on that. Now, grass swales are very important because they're used to convey the water from point A to point B. Grass filter strips, drainage planters, and importantly, green roofs. Further examples of green infrastructure and blue-green infrastructure, first of all, include just green spaces. And hopefully you could see this nice picture of a white flower meadow in the Figget Park in Edinburgh. Really nice, full of biodiversity and extremely useful for various things. Now, examples here also include SUDS drainage ponds. So this one is from an industrial estate in West Lothian. This one is from Edinburgh, and those two pictures are for detention basins. Now, there are multiple benefits associated with green and blue-green infrastructure, and those relate to a number of ecosystem services they provide. And most of those ecosystem services, as Professor Bhandari briefly pointed out in his introduction, are actually relevant to the reduction of environmental risks. And we are not just talking about the alleviation of flood risk, which is very important. We also should bear in mind the water quality improvements, positive effects on microclimate, enhancement of local biodiversity, recreation amenity value, It does also help to improve the air quality. Importantly, it does simplify logistics and contingency planning, and other people today already touched of it in their presentations. Now, all of the above have implications, positive implications for people's health and well-being. Okay, now I'd like to talk about the ecosystem services of blue-green infrastructure retention ponds. We've been studying quite a few of those, and this one particular, this is a nice historic pond. It is an ornamental pond in Royal Botanic Garden of Edinburgh, who is currently my employer. Now, it has a tremendous educational and recreational value. It is visited every day by hundreds, if not thousands of people, depending on the season. I don't have time to go into details, but hopefully at the very bottom, there is a reference, and I've put a few references at the bottom. If you can't see them because of your Zoom panel, hopefully later on, the presentations will be distributed and you could follow those references for detail. So we published a paper on it last year in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. Now, the slide.
Excuse me, Professor. Excuse me, sir, there is some black bar that is popping up on your screen. If it is possible for you to, otherwise, okay, it is slightly covering the top portion of the presentation. Some black bar is coming, but we are not able to get what exactly it is. Sometimes it is coming and popping up. If there is anything on your screen, if you can, yeah, there, yeah, black bar is popping up. Yeah, if it is removable, it will be good. Otherwise, also, yeah, one part has gone, but still some on top there is a black. Yeah, yes, there, yes, there.
Right.
There
okay. Srivals, I'm not quite sure. It keeps popping up because I am a co-host, I guess. I'm not.
Now it is shifted to the right side, right top. It is there still. Okay. Okay, sir. Okay. Let it be there. Perfect. Fine.
Okay. I'm sorry about this technical problem. I hope you could see the most of it anyway. Okay, so clearly that is not the only pond we are studying. Here are the location of our sampling sites, and they're described in more detail in this paper, which I reference at the bottom. And I just want to show you a few more. That thing keeps popping up again. Now, on the left, there is a pond in West Lothian. It's an early burn, and basically it's a SUDS pond. And you could see it's a traditional design, but I'd say the design is quite unfortunate. I'd call it a bomb crater design. Surely, you know, we could do better than that. It's not particularly nicely landscaped either. The management is always zealous, and it basically cuts all the plants, you know, right down to the ground. This pond is not actually functioning that well either, I must admit. The valves are quite often blocked, and there is too much water in the incoming swales. Now, on the right, there is another extreme. There is a nicely landscaped pond in Appleton, but despite the fact, I'm just trying to change the slide, okay. Despite the fact that it has very nice plants, very nice macrophytes, there are problems with access. Basically, you can't get to it. It's fenced out, and there is a thicket of thorny shrubs around it. So it is an opportunity lost. And there is quite a scope of improvement in that regard. Okay, so the rest of the time, I'd like to spend on the Granton case study, which is an area in Edinburgh. And there we have a SUDS pond and a wetland, and I'll show you a few things about them. So the pond is here, and we first were a bit confused because it does look like the pond is draining into the wetland, which is just to the east of it. But in fact, there is actually no connection between the pond and the wetland. The wetland effectively is a continuation of Caroline Burn, which is here shown in blue color, and it emerges from the culvert at that place. Now, the outflow of the pond is actually to the north at this point. The pond is draining basically the stormwater from the nearby waterfront development. Now let's have a very quick look through the sequence of historic map. That's how the area looks in the 19th century, and that's pretty much the modern time. You could see there is a lot more housing development, and now is a sequence of maps, 19th, 20th, and now 21st century. And you could see that in the 21st century, the course of Caroline Burn has been altered, and we've plotted it here with those reddish dots. And that's because the area had to accommodate the housing development. Now, examination of Google Images actually shows that in 2003, there was no pond in this area at all. We could see at this point where Caroline Burn emerges from the culvert. In 2005, however, there is already a SUDS pond here, and authorities also put some plantings in the park as well. In 2009, there is some more housing, and also the wetland is becoming a bit better landscape. Now, wetland is an important SUDS feature in itself. Remember, it's not directly connected to the pond. And I just like to show you how it looks like, because it's functioning nicely. The water flow is slowed down, and all these plants helping to filter out the pollutants. Now, in 2010, you could see there is a little bit more development, both housing and slightly better landscaping. But after that, effectively, not much is happening. That's pretty much how the area looks like nowadays. Now, to understand the patterns observed, we need, of course, first of all, to get, our understanding of hydrology and hydrodynamics, and then we could proceed with chemistry, biology, and ecology. So what we've done, we applied a couple of well-established models by Newcastle University. This one is Shetron, which is a hydrological model. You could see the analysis of discharge on the graph in relation to the presentation, and the table shows you how the residence times actually change throughout the pond. Now pay attention to July to September time, when the residence time actually increases to nearly 20 days. Now that is conducive potentially to the development of nasty cyanobacteria, and whether there is a significant risk of it could only be understood by considering also biological and chemical patterns in relation to the hydrology as well. We also did some hydrodynamic analysis. Those are simulation with CityCAD, which is a well-established hydrodynamic model. And you could see that on this graph, the pond scenario simulations, which are in red, invariably both delay and decrease the peak of discharge after a number of extreme events. Now, that's the map which shows what happens after 1 hour in 100 years return period, very extreme event. And the upper, the upper panel is with no pond scenario. So you could see there is basically quite a bit of flooding because normally that area would have been dry without the pond, and the outlet to the wetland. Now, with the pond scenario, there is no flooding at all, just the pond increases in area and the volume. Importantly, at this point in the pond, there is a bridge, which is very nicely connecting both sides. So there is no loss of connectivity, there is no danger, of people being cut off. It's very good contingency planning for logistics. And by the way, that bridge also creates new habitats absolutely great for calcicolous lichens and for bryophytes. Now, this is a simulation, and it basically shows in the upper panel the scenario with no pond, and lower panel shows what happens in this Excel already made. The no pond scenario, you do get some flooding, and then the water basically resides. Okay, now getting to biodiversity. If there was no pond there, all these organisms, very nice organisms which I put in the slide, they would not be there, you know. So by creating a new habitat, we're actually increasing the local biodiversity. And could I just draw here on the rivet hypothesis? Basically, the rivet hypothesis in relation to biodiversity likens the ecosystem and the biosphere to an airplane. And every species represents a rivet. So the more rivets you take out of the airplane wing, the more risk you're running of crashing the plane. So by enhancing our biodiversity, we're actually alleviating the risk of any disasters. Now, the graphs here are about something else. They show the biological water quality indices of the Granton Pond on the right in relation to all other ponds in the area. And we could see that actually our water quality, biological water quality, is a little bit less than in other ponds, although the difference is significant. Why it is less? Well, what would help us to understand is, I'm trying to change the slide, a consideration of chemistry. And we've done quite a lot of analysis on the water chemistry. And one particular element I'd like to draw attention is boron. Now, boron is known to be negatively affecting macroinvertebrates. There are a number of others. I don't have details, but those analyses are for the water. We also did work on sediments, and that is published in Blue-Green Systems last year. That was a study together with Nottingham University. And what we found that the levels of many pollutants in sediments are actually quite elevated. That is actually great because the pond is actually doing what it is exactly supposed to do. It is trapping the pollutants. And by trapping the pollutants, it actually reduces the possibility of contaminations for any ecosystem downstream. Clearly, there should be appropriate management measures to tackle that. And one of the measures which authorities might wish to introduce is better landscaping, better plantings, both on the margins and also in between the pond and the road to reduce the polluted runoff from the road. Now, this graph, which is from a paper published in Blue-Green Systems, compares the species richness of plant at Granton Pond, which is at the left, with a number of other ponds. And you could see that there is quite a scope of improvement for Granton Pond. So it is kind of, you know, mediocre, could do a lot better than currently is. And clearly, there is quite a scope for improvement. And introducing more plants could be only good, would be great for biodiversity as well. Okay. I'm trying to change the slide. And it brings us to concluding remarks. Basically, what I've tried to do today, just galloping through a range of examples and referring to our other publication, and through the Granton case study, was to draw the attention to the value that ecosystem services or blue-green and green infrastructure in general, and SUDS ponds in particular, actually provide. We are focusing today on SUDS ponds, but I've touched very briefly on other features as well, in particular on the wetland. Our current work actually is related more to green roofs, so we've got data on that. Should anybody be willing to cooperate, you know, on any of those, we'll be very happy to consider. So today we focused mainly on hydrology, water chemistry, hydroecology, and biological water quality. And all of those are integral part of multiple benefits associated with blue-green infrastructure. Now, it needs to be said that all these benefits contribute to BGI recreational capacity and its amenity and biodiversity value. In many cases, that also translates into the educational value, or at least its potential, as I briefly touched upon, referring to the pond in the Royal Botanic Garden of Edinburgh. Now, there is absolutely unambiguous evidence for the alleviation of flood risk, and I hope everybody is convinced about that, because that's one of the main features, one of the main reasons those components actually there in the first place. But there are also multiple benefits which help to alleviate other environmental risks, and those are related to the water and air quality, to biodiversity, and also importantly, to the risk of the decrease in people's well-being due to the loss of connection with green space. By providing features, we, of course, help to tackle all of those. Pretty much that is all we've had time for, so all is left is to thank you for your attention. Very sorry for some of the technical problems. I hope you did get most of what I've been trying to show and talk about. I once again acknowledge contributions from multiple people here. I hope the slides will be distributed, so hopefully you'll get to see the references and should be able to follow some of the papers I've been referring to, and we'll be looking forward to see the conference proceedings in print as well. Thank you so much.
We must thank you, Vladimir, for your excellent presentation. It was highly illustrative. Thank you for presenting the case record, because I always believe that it's most impressive and inspiring when you see, because seeing is believing. And we indeed need more such case records to convince people that nature-based solutions are the ultimate answer to sustainable urban drainage system in built environment. So there's no question about it. You have also rightly pointed out a couple of things, the management of existing SUDS assets. Now, this is a very important thing, you know, because the care of detail that is to be exercised in maintenance and management in itself is a big issue. And I think when people try to replicate your examples and do similar things elsewhere, added focus would be necessary on this management of assets. The other thing, of course, I agree with you, the difficulties of reluctance of residents, and I think people's resistance to these. Now, they are part of the challenges, and I think these will also have to be met. I would also someday hope to hear in the next presentation, how do you integrate this to the holistic blueprint of the blue urban infrastructure and holistic solutions to given problems, where this is going to be one of the solutions. So I think there are a number of thoughtful ideas that you have given, and I must thank you very much for that. And with that, I think since it's 8 o'clock now, I would hand it over, the session over to the organizers, in the hope that if they have time, we can take a few questions on the three great presentations that we had this evening. So over to you, Sivalsa.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So you have moderated it so well in time. Thank you very much. So I think there are a couple of questions. I think if maybe the one question is there for Dr. Vladimir, is that there can be mosquito breeding in detention ponds. So how to control that? That was a question that came in the comment box, chat box.
Sorry, Srivalsa, could you just repeat the beginning of the question, please?
Yeah, it is. They are asking how to control the mosquito breeding in detention ponds?
That's a very good question, and I must admit I've not really dealt with this problem. Very good question indeed, and in particular, I appreciate that in many countries, in particular in tropical countries, that could be extremely important because clearly the mosquitoes there spread malaria and some other very nasty diseases. I must admit, where we work, we don't really have this problem to such an extent. In Scotland, there are midges, but people kind of get used to it. And basically, there is kind of a control for any particular residence, you know, they just spray repellent on themselves. That's a bit of a joke, folks. I kind of admit it's not such a problem in Scotland, and I've not dealt with it. So I'll have to pass on this one, I'm afraid.
Thank you, sir. If Manisha madam is there, there is one question that came after your presentation. How can we manage the full functionality of dam in changing weather conditions? How can we manage the full functionality of the dam in changing weather conditions?
I think I don't know whether they misunderstood my presentation. So what I was trying to say was, when you have a forecast of an extreme weather conditions, and if you have a model for understanding how the dam operates, plus the sensor systems, which will dynamically tell you all the dynamic variabilities. So the model plus the measurements will tell you how much water you are going to release and how it is going to affect the upstream or the downstream of the tree. That is what we have to integrate together. So if the extreme rainfall monitoring and its measurements and models stand separate, your flood model stands separate, and your dam monitoring model stands separate, you are not going to understand this interrelationship. So you need to see that where this plug and play has to happen, so that you will be able to provide insights into a possibility of cascaded effects of disaster.
Thank you very much, madam. So I hope we can end the session here because it's already just 8. We are on time. Professor Bhandari, can we conclude?
Yeah, I think it's a time to conclude. And before you conclude,
Yes,
I must thank you and your entire team for the opportunity. Please conclude it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So on behalf of the organizing committee, I sincerely thank Dr. R.K. Bhandari for very efficiently chairing this session. It was an honor to have him with us during the first session, to chair the session and to deliver the inaugural address. I also thank Dr. Dilanti Amaratunga, Professor Manisha Sudhir, and Dr. Vladimir for delivering very effective presentations and enlightening us, the participants. So all the participants' attendance is taken. So no worries. The feedback form will be shared only during the last session on 20th March, just after the panel discussion. We will be having a very brief half-an-hour closing ceremony. So that time only we will share the feedback form. So I once again thank all the participants. I think if there are no other concerns or questions, I think we can end. Chandan sir, shall we end, please?
Yeah, I just want to read 4 lines, which I have
written. Sir, please.
Just
please.
A disaster as it is today, because I have written on my own. Disasters are no longer nature-made, nor they are truly inherited from our ancestors. They are created mostly by the fast-forward, non-adjusting, reactive, power-hungry lifestyles that we have been dealing with. Disasters were unrecognized in 1980s. You can see all the database. When people lived with the laws of nature and have not learned much about the danger of playing with the industrial adventure. Disasters were not taking so rampant till we have become active in showing our earthly power in terms of tax-savvy mindset for the sake of supremacy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So tomorrow, 2 to 4 p.m., we'll be having the technical sessions running parallelly. We'll be having 2 technical sessions running parallelly. And tomorrow, 6 to 8 p.m., same time as of today, evening, 6 to 8 p.m. Indian time, we will be having Keynote session 2. And we have speakers, Dr. Rastogi, Professor Sabachnot, Dr. Stefsos, and Dr. Bojan. So please attend, participate, and both the keynote session as well as the technical session from 2 to 4 p.m. It will be 2 parallel sessions. So I hope with this we can end this meeting. Once again, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
See you tomorrow.
Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Yeah.